Good afternoon. I'm Brenda Schroeb, our worship associate here at Community Church, and I welcome you on behalf of our ministry team, our staff, and lay leaders. It is good to be together, both in person and online. Community Church is a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational congregation with a vision and commitment to build a world grounded in equity and inclusion. With me today is Jerry Brown, our Director of Music, our talented choir, Reverend Jude Geiger, our Minister for Community Engagement, Brother Zachary, who is our Minister for Pastoral Care, and Darnell White, our musician in residence. Community Church is in transition. We have sold our church building and are in the process of finding another in this neighborhood. We are guests at the church here, the Church of Incarnation. In the meantime, for which we are grateful, even if this beautiful space isn't perfectly reflective of our theology. Children are always welcome during worship. Feel free to move around this space or to move back and forth to join programming happening in the loft. The sound of babies crying or children fidgeting is a beautiful part of being in community. Masks are optional, but encouraged. We ask that everyone be respectful of each other's decision and need for personal space. Today's service is called Quieting the Prophet. Please rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn, Sia Hamba, number 1030 in our teal hymnal.
Sia, Let this be a house of hope. May our souls come together this hour and our hearts open up to the rhythms of our songs. Let us leave behind the frets that ever cling to us and share our true burdens with one another, so that in prayer and companionship we may find ourselves a love that shall inspire and endure. I invite us to sing our chalice lighting, Rise Up, O Flame. We light this candle, the flame of our heritage. May it ignite hope in our lives, in our community, and in the world.
Please join me in our unison affirmation. Unto the Church Universal, which is the depository of all ancient wisdom and the school of all modern thought, which recognizes in all prophets a harmony and in all scriptures a unity, and through all dispensations a continuity, which abjures all that separates and divides, and always magnifies, which seeks truth and freedom, justice in love, and individual discipline in social duty, and which shall make of all persons one beloved community, unto this church and to all its members, known and unknown throughout the world. We pledge the allegiance of our hands and hearts. Please join me in our land acknowledgement. We are gathered on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. We acknowledge the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement demonstrates a commitment to beginning the process of working to dismantle the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism. At this time, we'll take a moment to greet your neighbor.
In a moment, we'll enter into a time of silence, knowing with all the wiggles and sneezes and coughs of the world, it's not about the perfection of silence, but the intention. Join with me now. Spirit of life, God of many names, source of love, gather us this hour as a people of hope in the face of adversity, as a community of justice, where we see inequity as a faith for healing, in a world struggling between hardship and beauty, knowing the world is not yet what it could be. Teach us to not trip over the small wants and grievances when so many need us to be so much more than our smallest selves. We need to be more than that. Mother of grace, open our hearts where we are closed, widen our vision where we have become short-sighted, and open our mouths where silence has dominated our spirit. For too often we have learned that to be complicit where there is pain in the struggle of the long arc of the universe bending toward justice, may we remain and regain strength in this soul-saving work, of living faithfully into our humanity, in community, with passion, and with love. Amen. Behold, especially in our hearts this hour, all the peoples on the West Coast and central the U.S. that are enduring wave after wave of tornadoes. I invite us to rise now in body or in spirit and sing hymn number 1008 in the Teal hymnal, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
Trust you.
This afternoon's reading is We Will Only Rise by Jakaran Aloya, a Unitarian Universalist seminarian. My mom is a searcher, and I love her for that, because when we went to a lot of different churches when I was growing up, I got a rich background in what faith can look like. When I went to the Unitarian Universalist Church on my own, following her example, I fell in love. I knew instantly that I'd found my faith community. We Unitarian Universalists like to tell everyone that they're welcome, but I quickly realized that in order to be part of this community, I had to find a way to fit in, to not make waves about my needs. It's painful, physically and spiritually, to be silenced in an environment that encourages people to speak out against injustice. But it's something I deal with every day of my commitment to this faith community. I'm not alone. The default in most of our UU churches is whiteness. For non-white UUs, the rules of Unitarian Universalists have been very clear for a long time. Don't disturb the status quo. And we've had to keep quiet and fade into the background. Many of us are recruited into leadership positions, and as soon as we offer an alternative perspective or suggestion, we're discarded. Too many of us have learned the hard way that the only way that you can stay is if you're quiet and you sit in the back while you try to get spiritual nourishment from the worship service. As more people of the global majority have been drawn to UUism, especially queer BIPOC people. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color. They're leaving faith systems that tell them they're condemned. These seekers experience our theological freedom and say, you know what? I'm loved just as I am. These principles mean that I have a place in this world. I have dignity. I want to be part of that. But when they come into our UU churches, too often they're met with ambivalence, not welcome. What would it take to welcome BIPOC people? To start, it would require white UUs to say, hey, come in. How can we make you feel welcome? How can we incorporate what's important to you? To create congregations and spaces that are truly welcoming, we have to keep finding ways to widen the circle of care and concern. That circle shouldn't be a hard plastic white box. It should be a bubble that morphs and changes and moves. Our greatest aspiration should be that everyone can bring the best of their beliefs and their culture into our UU spaces and get to live them fully while also incorporating the principles that we all hold together. Here ends the reading. We Will Only Rise by Jakaran Aloya, a Unitarian Universalist seminarian.
Thomas A. Dorsey. How's that? Is considered to be really sort of the father of what is considered American gospel music. He wrote many of the great songs they sing in that tradition. The most famous song that he's known for is a song called Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And in a conversation with Mahalia Jackson, they each agreed that if one went first, that the other would serve at their service. And Mahalia said, Martin, if you go first, you got to preach about the dream at my service. And Martin said, if I go first, Mahalia, I want you to sing that Precious Lord song.
Gorgeous. Nationally this week, we pause to honor the life, the accomplishments, and the heroism of Martin Luther King Jr. We learn about the man, the mission, and the vision. We remember his quest for racial desegregation, his promotion of peace in general, and his widespread expansion of nonviolent protesting as a mark of active citizenship in the United States. We encourage civic volunteering this weekend. As a nation, we also tend to take a day off, many of us, from work tomorrow, and our schools will be closed, as will our office. It wasn't until 2000 that the holiday was observed in all 50 states. Interestingly, the holiday, and this is a quote from the history notes, the holidays combined with Civil Rights Day in Arizona and New Hampshire. While it's observed together with Human Rights Day in Idaho, it's also a day that is combined with Robert E. Lee's birthday in some states. Apparently Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, and Mississippi. We honor his legacy now in ways that we never could honor his life for when he was still living. We in the States, at least, our collective national consciousness, use different ways to single him out. We use dogs and we use fire hoses. Most of us will remember the classic photo, and some of us in this room were active in the call to justice during that time. And finally, tragically, a gun. We pick a day as good as any other to remind ourselves that we're not always our best selves when it comes to integrity of character, to remind us of the importance of compassion for our neighbor, and maybe to dream once more that there might be another way, to remember our moral failure as a nation. We take a weekend each year to mark the truth that something great happened on this soil, something that grew from centuries of pain and suffering, something that was brought most notably into pinpoint clarity by this man and so many other hidden figures supporting and leading up to his clarion call. And I'm going to talk a lot about the hidden figures in this sermon today. Something great that was an appropriate and fitting and remarkable and yet a simply necessary response to the torpor of our collective consciousness, otherwise was mired at the time and maybe likely still today. On this weekend, we thank you, Mr. King, for your dream, for your vision, for your sacrifice, even as we mourn and regret that such a sacrifice was apparently needed or allowed to occur. And we try to shake ourselves once more to realize that each of us are people left to pick up the mantle once more, and still. May your hearts come to know a way to celebrate that goes beyond the ready ease of just another day off that otherwise might pass us by unremarkably. I remember today the acclaimed movie Hidden Figures. It was that blockbuster hit that beat out Star Wars Rogue One opening weekend, something few thought possible for historical drama. As a quick refresher, it's based on the true story of the women who helped us get into space and ultimately later to the moon. The story focuses on 3 African American women, in particular among a larger cadre of African American women who were part of the Human Computing Program at NASA. Dorothy Vaughan, NASA's first African American supervisor, Katherine Johnson, a mathematician who calculated the trajectories for Glenn's Friendship 7 mission, and Mary Jackson, who according to NASA, quote, may have been the only black female aeronautical engineer in the field, end quote, in the 1950s. I can't recommend the movie enough. It's well worth seeing. And if you're feeling despair at what might be in these days, this movie may rekindle a sense of hope in difficult times. I think I can safely say, without spoilers, that the United States eventually does get out to space. As a kid, I was a strong science junkie. I loved all things science fiction, I still do, all things that involve dinosaurs and all things about space. There's an old comic graphic about people's awareness of dinosaur names that peaks during our young child age years and then spikes up again when we're grandparents listening to our grandkids. I was one of those kids who ate it all up. I would sit glued to any science discovery show on TV. I took every science class my school offered. I wondered if I would turn out to be an astronaut or a marine biologist or even an archaeologist. Despite it all, I never once heard those women's names until I saw this movie, Hidden Figures. These 3 women were impeccable, patient beyond all reason, brilliant, strong, and integral to the success of the race to space. And although Katherine Johnson would receive a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015 for her 33-year career at Langley, we as a nation waited 65 years to tell their story to the wider public. Actress Janelle Monáe, who played Mary Jackson, said in an NPR interview, and this is the quote, I was really upset because as an African-American young woman, I had no idea who Mary Jackson was, who Dorothy Vaughan was, who Katherine Johnson was, who as she says, the colored computers were. I had no idea. And I'm just like, this clearly had to be a mistake. These are American heroes. Without their brains, without their hard work and dedication to NASA and the long hours that they worked together, we would have not made it into space. We would not have made it into orbit. End quote. These three women were cultural and scientific saints in their own ways, and we couldn't tell their story, not for that 55 or 60 years. In the 1960s, America wasn't ready to share the celebration of one of humanity's shining intellectual achievements with three black women, stellar or not. We widely know the story of Rosa Parks, who was a public face of the Montgomery bus boycott, and she deserves every credit given to her for her prophetic voice calling out in the wilderness of segregated America. NPR writes about her. Few people know the story of Claudette Colvin. When she was 15, she refused to move to the back of the bus and give up her seat to a white person. 9 months before, Rosa Parks did the same very thing. Most people know about Parks and the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott that began in '55, NPR says, but few know that there were a number of women who refused to give up their seats on the same bus system. Most of the women were quietly fined, and no one heard much more. When asked why she is little known and why everyone thinks of only Rosa Parks, Colvin says the NAACP and all the other black organizations felt Parks would be a good icon, but she's an adult, and they didn't think teenagers would be reliable. She also says that Parks had the right hair and the right look. Her skin texture was the kind that people associate with middle class, says Colvin. She fit that profile. After Colvin's arrest, she found herself shunned by parts of the community. She experienced various difficulties and became pregnant, and civil rights leaders felt she was an inappropriate symbol for a test case. Now, I do not bring this up to be critical of the practical decisions of leaders in the civil rights movement, rather than reflect on one of our tendencies to find any way to quiet our prophets. Those leaders making informed strategic choices to address our collective cultural bias, so they shouldn't be blamed for speaking to the times. If Vaughan, Johnson, and Jackson could get us to the moon and back, and we couldn't speak of them, how would we ever hear the truth coming from a 15-year-old girl who didn't look the part of respectability politics? There's a very commonly read poem by Mary Oliver in UU Spaces called Wild Geese, which claims, "You do not have to be good, you do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting." Mary Oliver is not only a frequently heard poet in many UU congregations, but this poem is literally in our hymnal. So one could say her poetry informs our lived or practical theology. And yet some of us have to do better than good. Some of us do have to walk on our knees for 100 miles to be heard, to be valued, to be an impact on the wider story, and to be known for that impact. In fact, we as a nation have all too often demanded that of our prophets. In order to be heard, it is one of the tools of oppression to silence our prophets, make them adhere to a perfect standard, or invalidate their message by attacking their character. It's a strategy we're taught as kids is wrong in debate class, but as adults we fall prey to it again and again. None of us have to look too far in contemporary news stories to hear this old trick play itself out over and over. One, the woman who's been assaulted being blamed because she wasn't chaste, or trans folk being implied to be pedophiles for needing to just use a bathroom. Young black teens gunned down in our streets, being described as thugs in the news when their only offense was playing outside their homes. That woman, that trans person, that teen are today's next prophets, crying out in the wilderness for a more just world. When we find ourselves quieting down or negating their message of truth over some perceived imperfection, we're silencing our collective conscience bit by bit. That which stirs in us unease should not be confused with being wrong. We're just uncomfortable. Too often we become complacent with what is actually wrong in the world, and that feeling of unease is trying to tell us something. Complacency can be the death of the spirit. It can also allow threats to our neighbors to go unchallenged, as a history is rife with such tragic stories. Martin Luther King Jr. is such a prophet, who we as a nation have tried over and over to quiet how his story gets retold. We remember his visionary speech often about dreams that we can all find our place in, and forget his more challenging messages like this, quote, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." He asks us to get uncomfortable. Or his reminder in the letter from Birmingham City Jail in 1963 that read, "Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it must be demanded by the oppressed." And in that same letter, King would go on to lament, "Over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in this stride toward freedom is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice." Hearing his words travel 61 years ahead to today, I think of all the protests over the last few years, where in one breath pundits would extol MLK's calls for freedom, but pretend he didn't shut down roadways in Selma or demand desegregation in our neighborhoods in 100 public ways. It's another form of doublethink that's alive and well in our national conscience, and we need to nurture that healthy unease to it. I want to talk a little bit about our second principle, where we covenant to affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. I personally talk about understanding our principles as religious promises that we make and remake again and again. They're action statements rather than cradled beliefs. What does our second principle mean as an action statement? In light of Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday, how does it challenge us? The promise of justice, equity, and compassion in human relations is a promise that humanity may yet to have ever fully seen for all of our people. I probably could drop the word may and just say we've never reached that promise. It's an aspirational spiritual value that we're called to live into. As Unitarian Universalists, we are saying we're obligated to moving our world closer to the realization of that promise. Spiritually, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations are fully possible truths. We as a people choose to fall short again and again in living them out. But it's a choice to not live into those values, not a necessity. It's a choice, and one that our society chooses to make over and over. Theologically, we say those values are real, central to our spirituality, and we commit to that striving. That's an important distinction. These days, we seem to hear a growing cynicism that those values aren't possible in the real world, that the world just doesn't work that way, that if others get more, we have to get less, so why bother? Cynicism is a lie. It draws us deeper and deeper back out of our centered spirit. It separates our spirituality from the potential in creation, and it makes us forget our own holy powers. As we come upon our national holiday commemorating one of the world's great prophets, let us renew our commitment to living the truth of the Spirit, the promise of justice, equity, and compassion in our hearts, and in our words, and in our deeds. Our faith demands that of us. We're called to birth that promise into our lives and the lives all around us. Let us make a little more room for our prophets to be noisy, to be challenging, to make us uneasy to injustice. Amen, and blessed be. We now invite folks to rise in body or in spirit. Hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
We lifted our voices. Thank you. Life at Community Church is busy, whether we are online or in person. It is our hope that wherever you are and in whatever way you are comfortable engaging in the mission and ministry of this church, we have provided opportunities for you. A special attention to our first interview series called Say Hello To. I, Brenda Schroep, will be the first interviewee on Zoom at 7. Wait a minute now, it's not 60 minutes. It could be, or this is your life. That's this Wednesday on Zoom, January 18th, in the main Zoom room. I hope everyone will put it on your calendars, form a new habit. It's going to be the third Wednesday of the month, and Janet Koplos will be doing all these wonderful interviews. There will be another circle supper, which will be at lunchtime on January 21st. Please contact Janet Koplos for details. So that's January 21st at 1 p.m. We're thrilled to announce the return of our volunteer choir being led by Darnell White, our musician in residence. Woohoo! There'll be a sign-up sheet in the back there. Brother Zachary is waving his hand, so he's got the sign-up sheet. And so sign up. Tell everybody, we're back. We are a 7-day church and have programs running every day of the week. You can find more information in the program and on our website. Our ushers are going to pass a plate for our collection. If you are new here, please let the plate go by you with no pressure to give. We are glad for your presence. All gifts offered are accepted in gratitude. Thank you.
I invite us all to join in our extinguishing of the chalice. Sorry, Darnell. Knowing how quickly the flame of truth may be extinguished, how easily the chalice of fellowship broken, let us be vigilant in faith, keep peace in our hearts, and make care for one another the watchword of our lives together. So our light goes out everywhere into the world. For those who see God, may God be with you. For those who embrace life, may life return your affections. For those who seek a right path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it, move by move. For this is the day we are given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen.